practice.
Right.
But in the course of his memo to me, one of the questions he addressed was whether the signage policy as expressed in the HDC handbook was proper. And he says, basically, he doesn't think, part of his answer was that the relevant state statute does not expressly distinguish between temporary and permanent signs, as our handbook does.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I note that the HDC's authority to regulate activities in the district comes from the state statute and cannot be altered by the zoning regulations.
Okay.
So if it's the zoning regulations that are introducing this temporary permanent distinction, then we're not bound by that. In fact, we're bound by the state statutes, which makes no distinction. My only comment to that is as a practical matter, I don't know how you deal with it. It seems particularly onerous for somebody to have to come and seek a COA to put up a sign for 2 days to announce some event.
But they don't. You know, when the library announces something, or the church announces something, musical masterworks, blood drives, all these different things, they don't have to come to us for that.
Well, according to the attorney, they do, because we have authority over. It says no structure may be erected without a C of A, and structures include signs, and there's no exemption for temporary signs. So it's one of these things where you have a technical construction of the statute that says we have to exercise authority. The local zoning regs cannot change that authority. But I'm agreeing with Deanie's. It just seems so silly to me to say if we start saying, oh, every time you have a 3-day sign announcing an event, you've got to come to the Historic District Commission.
Yeah, I don't think anyone thinks you do, because in practice we haven't been doing that.
Well, I don't think they think we do have authority, because we've announced in our handbook that we have no jurisdiction over temporary signs.
Right.
The attorney's point is that statement is not legally correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what would you propose, or how would you suggest we handle this?
When I comment on more fully on what he says, I'll that same issue comes up with respect to another issue, and I sent him a follow-up question that Deanie essentially asked what you just asked. And I have not heard back from him about my follow-up questions. My personal reaction, not a legal reaction, is this is one of these situations where it's silly to attempt to assert authority. I don't think people will do it, and I don't think it matters that much if in fact it's truly a temporary sign.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that's why the zoning.
One thing we could do, if we want to, again, personal reaction, I haven't cleared this with the attorney, is to adopt some general policy that says a temporary sign is always okay so long as it is no larger than whatever size we want, and is not erected for more than 30 days. In other words, we could perhaps assert our authority, which we do have, and the statute says we have to assert the authority. It says you have to have a COA before you put up a structure, which would include a sign. But my question is, could we essentially grant a blanket C of A, or indicate that a C of A will automatically be granted for signs that are temporary, so long as they're, don't exceed a certain size, et cetera. I mean, we don't want somebody to be able to put up a temporary sign that's 8 yards by 12 yards high, and then they say, oh, it's only temporary.
Right, right.
So that's another possibility. I mean, the attorney did not think that this was a significant enough issue. What did he say? They said, basically the question was does the handbook accurately reflect the HDC's authority? And he says it does not in any critical way. So, and then he goes on to raise this point I just mentioned about temporary signs. So I don't think he's suggesting that we need to revise the handbook. But it does make sense. I mean, we don't suppose somebody gets it in their head, they're really upset about fill in the blank, fraudulent elections. And so they decide to put up a mammoth sign. And they say, but it's only temporary. You can't say anything. It's not that we have any say over the message. We don't. They can talk about fraudulent elections if they want, but we should have and do have jurisdiction over the size of the sign.
Right.
So you're actually suggesting we go a step further, because currently our practice is that we don't require anyone that has a temporary sign under 30 days to come in for a C of A. So are you suggesting that possibly we create a little bit more restrictive a policy where we make a limitation on the size?
But what I would suggest is that we craft something, and I don't know exactly how it would be done, and it's technically not a C of A, but we adopt a policy that says we do have jurisdiction over temporary signs. However, you may consider that a C of A for a temporary sign is automatically granted unless so long as the sign is not larger than some size. I can't think of any other features of a sign that we would care about. If it's only temporary, I don't know. Maybe so long as it's not over a certain size and does not have blinking lights on it. I don't know.
Right, it could be
about what it would be in a temporary sign that would be so objectionable that people in the district, people in the town, and us would get really upset by it. I just need some thought.
So as long as it would comply with the other standard zoning regulations according to regarding signs, then those things are covered in that regulation.
That's right.
Lights and
we could say that.
size.
Sure,
Yeah.
would be the easy shorthand. Um, so we had sort of adopt a policy that says, although the HDC has authority over temporary signs according to state statute, you may consider that a C of A is granted for a temporary sign not to exceed 30 days, so long as it complies with other conditions set forth in the zoning regulations.
Yeah, yeah. Because in effect, that is what we actually do now.
Yeah. We just don't,
Right.
we don't stipulate a size.
No.
For example, with the church, with the congregational church, they often choose to put banner type signs. So we don't stipulate a size, but if we were to stipulate a size, that could in theory interfere with what they often choose to do. It's hard to stipulate an exact size because we'll conflict with someone else's First Amendment rights, right?
Well, I think the size comes down to square footage of the sign, from what I remember.
I didn't know that.
So it could be, as long as the dimensions don't exceed the square footage, it can be any length or height or whatever.
Right.
That's just what I remember off the top of my head.
I didn't realize we had a size already in the regulations.
Yes, yes, there is.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's just something to consider, but I'm wondering, again, the reason this came up now is in the like for like form, it specifies that as Mark drafted it, the sign, we only have authority with respect to permanent signage. It says a C of A is required for permanent signage. Technically, a C of A is required for all signage. So
right.
The question is, do we want to say signage permanent, signage display for, I'd have to think about the language, but do we want to try to clarify do we want to adopt a policy that, such as what I've said, that we will consider a C of A automatically to be granted, or put in a sentence somewhere that says, although in this like for like form, although the HDC does have authority over temporary signs, we will consider that a C of A is approved so long as the signs meet the requirements of the town zoning regulations.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
That seems sensible. Why don't you, John, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you draft a sentence, and then at the next, Martha could send it to us, we could think about it, and then perhaps we could vote on it in the next meeting.
I'm happy to do that.
Yep, that sounds good to me.
Okay. a lot about temporary and permanent there. That was one of the points that the attorney raised.
Okay, and I'll send everyone a copy of the zoning regulations regarding signage too, which has all kinds of details in it. Okay, so we can push the like for like approval to the next meeting then. That discussion will continue. So we can go on to the next item, Lafayette Trail Marker update. I let the selectmen know that we have approved that. I asked them to put it on their agenda for the next meeting. It's not there. They are meeting tonight, but it's not on their agenda. So hopefully we can get it on for the next meeting, which will be in a couple of weeks. Because I would like them to definitely acknowledge that that has been approved, because the town is responsible for installing it. So that's going to continue at the next meeting. And then we have the Historic District GIS overlay update. And I did get an email from Russ, who's not able to be with us today, stating that he's been communicating back and forth with the app GEO people. Here we are. And what they're doing is they're creating an overlay for the GIS system, which will indicate the boundaries of the historic district. And we're just working on getting the boundaries of that accurate on the overlay. And as far as the pop-ups go, they can disable the pop-ups until we have all the data ready and correct, as long as we're satisfied with that. And they would also be able to link to any documents that we would want to prepare about any building. And those documents, that information can be stored on a server, on a town server, if there's room. Or we could pay for, we could pay an annual hosting fee to host that data, but probably we can do it on a town server. We would just need to talk with the town IT people about that. So it's moving forward, and we will keep you updated on the details, but it looks like it's not going to be too difficult to provide that. So that's good news. And are there any comments or questions on that? Go to the next thing. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is the Congregational Church banner frame.
Yes, and this gets into the response I did hear from Michael Carey, who's the attorney, who's a partner of the town attorney, Jack Collins. And I must say, I think this is an illustration of how lawyers can be useful. He had information about a current Connecticut Supreme Court case and some details of what, in construing what turns out to be a rather complicated statutory scheme that provides some clarification. I did have follow-up questions for him, and he had said he would get back to me before the meeting today, but he hasn't. So I'll highlight those questions as they come up. Bottom line about the banner, about the sign at the church, I think we do have authority over that. So to try to make this a little simpler, I've got 5 pages for you, and unless somebody knows an easy way to share a document, which I don't know, I'll just hold them up. Anybody know with this?
Could you please send them to us after the meeting too?
I will do that. Now the caveat
Thank
here
you.
are these are my 5 sheets, and I believe they reflect honestly what the attorney says in a more detailed memo. I don't want to send the memo yet because some of my follow-up questions I think may cause the attorney to change some of his phrasings or add something else. He has said he does not object to sharing his opinion memo with the commission, but I just haven't heard back from him. I'm not sure whether he will want to update it.
Okay.
So tell me if you can read this. There are 2 types of signs.
Yeah.
And these are my phrases. There are structure signs and advertising signs. A structure sign is something that's attached to the ground or attached to another structure. So another structure might be a shed, might be a fence, and we do have authority over structure signs. I won't go into, because it's not really relevant, why I was confused, but this is a separate statute that concerning advertising signs and bill posters. And we also have authority over advertising signs as well as structure signs. So the key is that this authority over advertising signs is additional to the authority we have over structure signs. Jump in if you have questions.
Well, do I understand you correct? My apologies for being late. Do I understand, John, that if I heard correctly what you said, this is an expansion of authority, not because of some change from a legal point of view, just informing us of clarifying our rights.
Correct. Yeah, it's no expansion. So anyway, where we're left is with these 2 categories, what I call structure signs and advertising signs. Some may be both, some signs may be both, but not all advertising signs are structure signs. So you could, for example, have an advertising sign that is not affixed to the ground. It could be tacked to a tree. It perhaps could be a banner that's floating in the air, although it would seem to me that a banner would have to be attached to something.
But for example, we've often talked about the signage at the ice cream shop.
Yes.
And so what I'm if some of those signs are advertising, we would be able to opine on that if appropriate.
Correct. I mean, one of the signs at the ice cream shop was tacked to a tree.
Right.
And it's not, by my understanding of what the attorney said, that's not a structure sign. It's not affixed to the ground. It's not attached to a structure that itself is affixed to the ground, because a tree is not a structure.
Right.
So anyway, so not all advertising signs are structure signs. Similarly, not all structure signs are advertising signs. And this was part of what was really new and important about what the attorney had to say. There's a 2018 Supreme Court case, and it was not an HDC case, it was a zoning regs case, but the attorney thought it was applicable because it was construing identical language about what's the meaning of advertising. And the common understanding, or my common understanding of advertising is something when you're trying to sell a product or sell a service, but it's a much broader category. It includes, notably, promulgating a doctrine or an idea, or I can't read my own writing, or securing attendance if you're advertising an event. The question then, and this relates to one of my follow-up questions, is, well, what is not included in advertising? In the case that they were talking about, it involved a woman who was putting up signs castigating a contractor for doing a sloppy job. And the court said, that's not advertising. At one level, that seems to me, I mean, the problem for me is it seems like every communication, in a sense, conveys an idea. The woman who was not found to be advertising was, to my mind, conveying an idea that the contractor is disreputable or dishonest. But how broadly do we construe the terms of an idea? The example that I thought of that might not be advertising, and I asked this in a follow-up question to the attorney, I haven't heard back, is what about, let's say, the Lafayette sign? I can think of ways in which the wording on that sign is conveying ideas, but it might well be that the answer is no, you're just conveying historical information. It's not really advertising. So some structure signs, right? Not all structure signs are advertising signs, is the heading. Some structure signs might not, perhaps the Lafayette sign might not be an advertising sign. Now here's to my mind, the really important issue that the attorney didn't really spell out, and I added, I've asked a follow-up question. He provided the statutory language. And as I read this language, we have different types of authority over different structure signs and advertising signs. So for structure signs, it says no C of A, no structure is permitted unless the HDC considers and approves of C of A for exterior architectural features. My question is, if something is just a structure sign, do we have any authority over where it is placed? That was a follow-up question. You can see why it's important, because with respect to advertising signs, we specifically have authority over style, material, size, and location.
John, is there a chance that we have two different things that were probably spelled out at two different times. And I mean, do you have the dates of when the criteria or for the structure signs was developed versus when the advertising sign material was developed?
I would have to look that up. They are both sections of the same statute, though. They're
Right.
different subsections, but the question is whether one was amended later. I don't know.
Well, the only reason
Right.
I was asking that is it may be if one was later than the other, then it says that there was learning on the part of the historic districts, and they realized they needed to be covering an additional set of specifics to maintain the historic character. That was the basis of my question.
Yeah, that's possible. I don't have an answer.
Okay, I didn't expect. I don't care if you didn't have an answer. You're getting us to where we're really considering the nuts and bolts, which is extraordinarily helpful.
Yes.
And something that we ought to then reflect in the language that we use.
So another question, and I strongly suspect I have the answer to this last one, but if a sign is both structural and advertising, may the HDC assert the broader advertising sign authority? And I think the answer is yes. I think that the advertising sign authority is additional authority. So if something's an advertising sign, we clearly would have authority over location. I'm almost at the end. Two more sheets.
Can I ask one other question while you bring this up? In front of the house that's next to ours, so that would be like 45 Lime Street, and then the next thing you have is the center school. There is a marker in the ground that sticks up that's that granite, and it says New London 15 miles, and it's a Benjamin Franklin. This highway was called the Benjamin Franklin Highway, and now we have never thought about that, but as you're talking, that is a very useful artifact that triggers from something in the past. When we are taking your criteria, would that be a basis of protecting that sign?
Well, I think so.
It's not a sign. It's a granite post with engraved material.
I think so, John, and that actually comes up in my next. It's one of the questions in my next sheet.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
So, here are my examples, so you can test yourself. What about the FCCOL sign? Is it both an advertising sign and a structure sign? What do you think? I would say yes. It is affixed to the ground, so it's a structure sign, and it quite clearly, this is the Black Lives Matter sign, is promulgating a doctrine or idea. So
It's also tied to the fence, just FYI. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So the question then comes up, well, may we assert our advertising sign authority over it? Again, I've asked the follow-up question to the attorney, but I think personally, I'm not expressing a legal opinion, that the answer would be yes, if our advertising sign authority is additional to our structure sign authority, then we would have authority over that sign. May the HDC regulate the sign's message, the contents of the sign? And the answer, of course, is no. We've said that from the beginning. That gets into infringements on the First Amendment. What about the Lafayette sign? The question there is that an advertising sign? Are you, by the content, conveying the idea that historic figures are worthy of recognition? I don't know, but it's not conveying an idea or doctrine, to my mind, in the same way that a Black Lives Matter sign does. So the question then is, well, if it is only a structure sign, do we have any say over where it is located? And that was one of my follow-up questions, because remember, the structure sign authority does not list authority over location as one of the HDC's.
But in the case of the Lafayette sign, they're not proposing we put it, they're not suggesting we put it somewhere that we're objecting to. They're just offering us a sign for us to choose where to place it.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So that's an excellent point, Deanie. But I guess I'm thinking a better example would be a sign that somebody wants to put up in a certain
Right.
spot and we don't like it, and
Right.
then
Yeah.
do we have authority?
Yeah.
So, John, the example I had that might be like your highway marker is the witness stones that Carolyn's going to talk about, which are inscriptions, but they're flat to the ground. Or you're talking about John, a pillar with engraving on it. It's not classically what we think about as a sign. Here's what a structure is. Any combination of materials other than a building, which is affixed to the land, and shall include but not be limited to signs, fences, and walls. So it would seem to me that anything that is affixed to the land is something over which we have authority. I mean, they probably
with that definition,
sorry, go ahead.
No, with that definition, the very nice boulder outside of Deanie's house that has the inscription to terms of Revolutionary General, and the Ben Franklin post that's outside my neighbor's house, both would fall in that category.
I think that's a plausible interpretation.
Now, I'm not trying, we don't need to work this out now, but I mean, these are the kind of things that as you begin to kind of develop your approach, that you'll need to have points of view on, so that we have a consistent point of view throughout the historic district.
Yes.
Okay. All
right. Last page. Other issues. What's a bill poster? Our authority over advertising signs extends to bill posters. This was the subject of another follow-up question. The attorney's response to that issue was basically, I have no idea what a bill poster is. Now, he has consulted the standard legal authorities, legislative history, standard sources that courts turn to, such as dictionaries, and he didn't find anything. I did a little internet sleuthing, and my best guess is I found two things of interest. One was a historic picture of what was labeled a bill poster, which was basically a fence, a broad area on which a variety of posters advertising businesses or announcing events were posted, slapped up. So you could think of it as a holder for multiple signs.
So that's like the as you walk into our post office, there's that area where advertising goes up.
Yeah,
Bulletin board.
right.
It's
A bulletin board. I also found a billboard manufacturer or billboard industry site. It's amazing what you find quickly on the internet. This came just by plugging in different words. And fascinating to me, the billboard industry has posters as a term of art. A poster is a medium-sized billboard. A junior poster is a small-sized billboard. So that also fits, and it makes sense. I mean, if somebody just has a billboard up, or a small billboard, or a bulletin board stuck in the ground, that in itself is not classically viewed as a sign because it doesn't say anything. It's waiting for somebody to rent the space. But it makes sense we should have the authority to regulate that. So again, I haven't heard back from the attorney, but I pointed him to the sites, and I suspect that's I doubt we'll be faced with bill poster issues, but I suspect
I think a bill poster is lost cat, wanted signs. That's what they seem like to me.
a bill poster is I mean, that's another reading, but what I'm finding is a bill poster is a bigger receptacle for a sign or signs.
Yeah.
Anyway, the second issue we've already talked about. What's our authority over temporary signs? The state statutes do not distinguish temporary from permanent signs. Local zoning regulations cannot alter our authority. So we were talking about possible ways we might want to deal with temporary signs. I did raise the question, I have not heard back about political signs. Is that HDC technically required to exercise authority over them? They are structures if they're hammered into the ground. Again, it seems to me that this might be the sort of thing we would want to address with a general policy, saying if they're temporary, or if they're erected for no longer than such and such a period, and the size conforms to the maximum size in the zoning regs, then we kind of grant blanket C of A approval. So that's it. I thought the information was very, very useful, and especially useful is to know about, to my mind, is the very broad definition of advertising, which does give us a lot of authority that arguably we don't have under the heading of structure signs, and authority that I wouldn't have thought we had, it just because my preconception had been that advertising was was a narrower concept focusing on sale of goods or services. So that's my report.
Thank you.
I
John,
do
thank
think-
you very much for that very thorough report, very helpful. And the nice thing about this is that out of your work is going to come, I'm sure is going to come a much clearer policy, and also a helpful policy just in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Martha raised earlier the question of the September 3rd minutes, which in my opinion, we could now go ahead and approve. The reason we had held off was because there was a phrase in there in which we asserted that we had authority over the FCCOL sign. My concern had been that the particular language about signs, which related to advertising signs, might limit our authority. But as I mentioned, it turns out when you get into the weeds of the statutory construction, that is additional authority over advertising signs. I think my view that FCCOL sign would be an advertising sign anyway, which would mean we certainly could regulate its location as well as its size and materials, etc. And third, it seems to me that the definition of advertising in this 2018 Connecticut Supreme Court case is broad enough to encompass the measure, the message in that sign. So I don't have any problem approving minutes that include in them a phrase saying, I don't have the exact language in front of me, but the phrasing essentially reports that we do have authority.
So I move that we approve the September 2020 minutes.
I second. All in favor?
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I apologize. I've got to drop off out of the meeting. I've got something going on here. So, but thank you for all your hard work, everybody, and we'll just be in touch next month.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello?
Okay, it looks like we have witness stones up next.
Is Carolyn on?
Yes, I'm on. I think you've all seen the introduction that Martha sent around, an overview of the Witness Stones project in light of John's research. And it seems to me, although you all will decide, that the witness stones that would be installed in the ground because they're attached to the land would require HDC approval. That's what I take away from John's discussion this morning. I hadn't originally known whether or not those signs, because they're very small, they're 4 by 4 inches, and they're flush with the ground, if they would require approval or not. Perhaps they do. And the sign that would be installed in front of the library, as far as I understand, HDC regulations does require approval and perhaps a C of A. Martha's going to guide me on that, and I could prepare that for the next meeting to cover any or all of those signs, depending on what's required. So
Mhm.
I think you probably all had a chance to take a look at the description of the program, what it is, what it will involve, how it will unfold. It includes the schools, the library, the church, the museum. So it's a consortium of groups in the town that will move forward with this initiative. I just wanted the HDC to be aware of it for one thing, and a second thing to find out which parts of that program would need actual formal approval from the HDC. So you just let me know if you have any questions or anything that I can answer, and how we move, what our next steps are after this.
I have
one
a question.
question.
First is, I think this is a great opportunity. But I'm speaking personally with that comment. Why was it limited to 12 stones?
That's a good question. There's cost involved. For example, the McCurdy House, John McCurdy, over the course of, let's say, I don't have exact numbers, but let's say over the course of 20 years, there were numbers of enslaved people who served or were held in bondage on that property. It seemed as if the part for the whole would make the point that we would pick one of those enslaved people and install one stone rather than 6 or 8. And the same is true for the parsonage next door. We know from the 1790 census that there were 4 enslaved people in that household, but there would only be one stone. So you can opine on that. Perhaps you think more would be better, but my objective was to indicate which properties on Lime Street did at one point involve the labor and the servitude of people who were held in bondage, not to identify each one with a stone, but rather perhaps on the website, which the library is going to launch and maintain, there could be additional material that would enumerate other enslaved people on the street. For example, one more example, the Reverend Jonathan Parsons, who lived next door to where the present Congregational Church is, the church records show that he had 2 enslaved people. He may, of course, have had more, but there are only 2 whose names appear in the record. But my expectation was to install one witness stone to indicate the presence of enslaved labor on that property.
Well, can the 12 be related to that there were only 12 sites, or there are more sites, and you're going to select the 12 from those sites?
No, on Lime Street, to the best of my knowledge, the extent of my research so far, there are 12 sites. Oh, sorry,
Okay,
there are fewer than 12 sites. There are, I'll have to give you that number, John. Perhaps there are 10 sites, because on one site on Upper Lime Street, it was thought that it would be important to have 2 markers for one site. So perhaps it's a total of 11 sites. That's a good question. I can be specific about it for you.
Well, I think the important thing is you have a logic for coming up with a number that relates to the situation 200 years ago. I mean, the logic you just spelled out.
That's correct.
And so that any number that we have can be the result of the kind of research that you're doing.
That's correct. And if in the future additional research indicates that there are additional sites, not additional enslaved people, but additional sites, additional properties along today's Lime Street where there also were enslaved people living, residing, then we could always, add an additional stone or 2.
Okay. Then the second question I have, I'm thinking about the scale of funding and so forth.
Yes.
What roughly, I'm not asking for a precise number, but roughly what do you think is going to be the cost per site?
The cost per stone is $200.
And that includes the engraving and everything and installation?
That does not include installation. That's the cost of the concrete cube attached to the engraved bronze plaque. So there would be installation cost in addition.
Carolyn, in the document that Martha sent, it stated that it would require property owner's permission, but if it's going into the sidewalk is town property. Is that not correct?
That is correct, but inserting the block into the pavement was not our initial intent, but rather to place these blocks in adjacent to the sidewalk, but not in the sidewalk. And of course, there's not sidewalk all the way along Upper Lime Street.
I see.
But
So
that's
on the lawn.
be either way. I don't think that's a huge consequence. It could go in the sidewalk if that's the preference, let's say, of the HDC or of someone else. Our thought was to put it in the lawn near the sidewalk so that it's visible from the sidewalk, but not in the sidewalk.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So at some point, maybe you already have a list of the sites that the initial 12, whether it's 11 or 12, but the initial group of sites. Is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And this is anyone in the team that's doing this phenomenal project? Is there anyone sitting down and saying, what's the best way for us to get the approval or the support from the people who currently own the properties, the 12 properties?
Yes, we've certainly considered that. For example, let's just take for one example, Marty Ames.
Right.
Some of these stones would be positioned. For example, there would be probably two on the lawn of the Congregational Church, and we know that they would approve the stones. And the same with the Florence Grizzle Museum because they're partners in the project. But the other individual property owners who are not directly involved in the planning of the project would need to be consulted. And if they agree, wonderful. If they don't agree, then we would try to find a workaround, which would be an adjacent property where we might be able to secure approval. So I could give you more concrete examples, but
no, I just wanted to make sure that that was on your agenda. That was the reason for my question, because I think that's going to be a very important factor.
And do you think it would be difficult?
Have you thought about, because the amount of money you need for this, let's say it's 300 times 12 is $3,600. Mm-hmm. Seems like that's let's say it ends up being 4,000 or 5,000, something like that. Mm-hmm. That is a fairly straightforward amount of money to raise.
Yes.
Now, is there been any thought about, putting together a small group of people that write checks so that you take the financial burden out of this, which may in a couple of situations facilitate what you're trying to do?
Yes, that would be great. And there has been thought about that, but no concrete plan. I think the church would take the lead on we've sort of divided the costs among the different partners, and the church would take the lead in funding, providing the expense, covering the expense of the stones themselves.
Okay.
Carolyn?
Yeah.
Are any of the institutions that are behind this, are they planning to install a larger permanent exhibition, let's say, telling the larger story of enslavement in this area? I know from traveling around, the country, certainly in the South and Newport and some other places that were centers, there are very, very interesting kind of interactive exhibitions on this. And I think that, just the little stones in the lawns, may be interesting, but they are a long way from telling the whole story.
Yes, that's very true, Deanie. It's an excellent suggestion. The library would be one place where such an exhibition perhaps could be permanently included.
I think it would put the little plaques, should the property owners agree to them, in context, but also if there's a problem with property owners not wanting to have the plaques, which I suspect there will be, it would still give us a place to tell the story.
Yes.
Yeah. You are proposing the sign at the library, outside the library, which would presumably have a map of all these sites and would say something about the issue. It would not, as Deanie suggests, be a detailed exhibition, but at least there would be an introduction to the prevalence of this in this what one legal opinion was called this quote unquote peculiar institution.
That's right. And that's not to suggest that enslaved people were working only on properties on Lime Street, of course, because there were enslaved people in all throughout the town, the original town of Lime, and a large number of them, quite a surprising number of them, in fact. So that larger story also needs to be told, but it's not easy, in fact, to figure out how exactly to tell the story in a visual and descriptive way. So that's something that we would be working on, but starting with the sign. The sign would have a description of the project, a map showing the location of the stones, a key to the stones, and perhaps, one or two other images. And I did send Martha 2 examples of signs that we had looked at and perhaps would consider something similar to. So she can perhaps send those to you at the next meeting or before the next meeting, so you could have an opinion on that.
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn, I have a couple of additional ideas. And I'm tying this to raising the money.
Yes.
The first is we have a newbie on the block, Roger Torrey Peterson Estuary Center in the Bee and Thistle.
Right.
And it would be appropriate if I look at the local partners, they would love to be part of the. I could say I would bet 99% that we'd be able to convince John Forbes and Claudia Weicker that this is something that the Roger Torrey Peterson should be part of.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
So whenever you're ready to have that meeting, let me know and we can set that up, okay?
That would be great. I'll send you an email.
What I would hope that by that time, whatever the number is, whether it's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, that you would say, to be part of the sponsoring group, the sponsoring group is going to provide half of these funds, and the other half are going to come from individual donations. I'm only saying that as an example, but I think that as long as you keep it within a number like 5 or 6, you can quickly, get it paid for, and so that just takes that off the table.
That would be great. That's certainly my hope. And John, just a note for you, because I know you're involved in this, is that we would like to place 2 or possibly 3 witness stones somewhere in front of the Bee and Thistle Inn, the Roger Torrey Peterson Center. So we were hoping to get their approval for the placement.
I will give you a tentative approval just on the telephone now.
Oh, that's great.
And so when you can contact me separately, and we can set up a meeting with Claudia, and we'll just do the next board meeting.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now, the other one that's not on here that seems to me is generally a good partner on things like that is the the one that Mary Seidner heads up, the
LYSB.
Lime Youth Services Bureau.
Yes.
And so that would be another one that has got they contribute. They have a number of places where, for example, we were very much working with them on their small lending library. But these kind of projects are often embraced by Mary Seidner and her team.
That would be great too. Good.
And whenever you're ready, I mean, I'm sure you know Mary as well as I do, so I don't think you need an introduction.
Thanks, John.
Now, the other thing would be you don't have the Lime Art Association. I'm just going down the big nonprofits, and whether this would be of interest to them or not. But I think that they, now that they're part of they're kind of at that. We now have 3 different organizations of nonprofits at the same corner, and they're one of the 3. That might be a way of inducing them to kind of join.
Good.
And then the final one is the Lime Art Academy.
Yes.
And are you from? Do you know the new head of the board?
I don't.
Okay, then contact me and we'll make another contact there.
Good, Joan. Maybe I could call you this morning.
I'm on a crisis with Noah this morning.
Okay. Well, whenever convenient. I'll send you an email.
What? You have my telephone number?
Nope.
860-434-0809.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And this afternoon would be fine.
Okay, perfect.
Now, let me just open it up. I would wonder if other people knew of other organizations that I think embracing this. Oh, I know what, excuse me, there's one big one I've forgotten. The Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut has rewritten their criteria for donations, which they now have specified 3 different groups are giving priority to. One is is lower income. Second is recent immigrants. And third is the Black and brown communities, particularly in the low income areas. Now, I don't know whether this would be of interest to them or not, but at least I think a telephone call to Allison Wood or to Maryam Alahi would be well received.
Good.
And
Carolyn, is there
you probably know the right people there, but the other person would be John Sargent, and the Sargent family are the people that have the 200-acre up at Hatchett's Point.
Okay.
And he is a major. He and John Pritchard of Lyme are really big in terms of this new set of criteria.
Okay, great.
is there
Okay.
Deborah, Carolyn, to your knowledge, is there a similar effort going on behalf of American history, or is this? I mean, because it could become, it is opening up a larger conversation. Going back to signage in the historic district, we could, be opening up a lot of other, opportunities for signs.
True. To my knowledge, Jeannie, there's no effort. I think this is the first one of any sort to try to recover the history of the town, those parts of it that have been missing and forgotten or omitted or whatever word is the most appropriate. It's kind of fascinating to try to trace that. When did this history get left out? When did people stop remembering? But that's another story. But it is interesting, and certainly Native Americans are very important. I've tried hard to find out if there were Native Americans. You probably all know in the first those colonial wars, King Philip's War and the Pequot War, there were Native American captives who were enslaved. And I've tried hard to find out if there were any enslaved here in Lyme, but I haven't found that there were any. So to the best of my knowledge, there were no Native American war captives enslaved in Lyme, but that doesn't mean there weren't Native Americans. I do know that someone named George, a Native American, ran away from Matthew Griswold at some point, but he was an indentured servant, he wasn't enslaved. So it's tough stuff to try to really detail. But you raised a question. I'm just saying I've looked at it. It's fascinating. It's important. It's hard to research, and it would be certainly a place to move next. And also, trying to figure out how to tell the larger story of enslavement, under which I include Native Americans, not just African Americans, how to tell that larger story throughout Lyme, which would include Black Hall and Griswold Point. You all know Black Hall. The legend is that the Black Hall was the home of an enslaved, quote, Negro, whom the first Matthew Griswold set up to watch over his crops. But that's anecdotal. There's no evidence for that at all. But it's interesting. It goes back to the very foundations of the town.
Very interesting.
And are you going to be writing anything about this, you personally?
Yes, I'm writing a book, actually.
Okay. And when will that be ready?
Oh, I have no idea because I've done nothing but witness stones for the last 2 months or more when I decided
Okay.
to sort of set that aside, the research project, and do this community outreach. So not for another, certainly not for another year, John, but there's some, I've included some aspects of it in Forgotten Voices, the book that I published last year. And I've been doing a number of talks at the library and the museum and the church that do address the history of enslavement here in Lyme.
Okay.
But the book will be a while.
All right.
I have three points or questions.
Mm-hmm.
Two relate to funding, which is not technically, I guess, an HDC issue, but it's come up. I may have missed it. Is the Old Lyme Historical Society on your list?
No, we weren't inclusive. I mean, you've all raised this. There are certainly other organizations that could be drawn into this project. The planning is complex and on the planning committee, and then enlarge that small group to include, two others. The museum. It started out with the schools and the church, to include the museum and the library, all of whom are very eager. But it's just from doing the planning stage, the research, the planning, the conception, the organization. In terms of funding, it would be great to have a larger group. And in terms of buy-in, community buy-in, I would hope that Lyme Historical and Lyme Academy of Art and others, organizations on the street, would be interested and approving, and perhaps be able to contribute some resources as well.
It may well be, this is my second point, that you would find fairly significant support, not only from individuals, but from any range of businesses too that are on Lime Street. And it could be that if the monies raised exceed the amount that is required to produce the stones and install them and produce a sign, that the library might be interested in having an exhibit. This is a point that Deanie
Yes.
raised, and extra funds could help with that, and that might be a place where the names of supporters could be listed or on a website.
That would be great. That's a good idea, John.
Right.
I think you're all suggesting that there should be sort of a new an actual fundraising arm of this organization, which we've not done yet. We've not created.
I think, somebody made, I guess Carolyn made the comment that maybe there are some homeowners who would not be happy with this, but I think on the flip side, there are likely a significant number of organizations and individuals who would get very excited about this. And it may be one of the easier fundraising efforts, especially since you're not talking about raising $1 million.
Yes, the costs are actually fairly modest.
Yeah.
We haven't made it any. We don't have any intentions that are extraordinarily costly at this point. Deanie's idea of a permanent exhibition, and perhaps in the library, and I think Katie Huffman would be excited about that also. Of course, it would have to do with space and where would they put it and all that sort of thing. But I think in theory, she would be excited by the idea.
My third and last point goes back to John's first question, where when we were talking about how many stones there might be, and you said in some places you would have just one representative individual. Yes. One thought crossed my mind. This is such a dramatic presentation that another option would be to have your one representative stone, and then right next to it have a second stone that at least lists the names of other people at that site. And I know you said, well, that could be mentioned on the general sign, but not everybody's going to see the sign. People who do see the sign are not going to remember what's on it, and it's very dramatic to know that this in some instances is not just one isolated individual, but
right. And of course, bear in mind, John, that we don't always know the names. Actually, naming the names is an important consideration in this project, but it's difficult to know the names. Very often you just know from the census that there were 4 people enslaved on a property. You don't always have the names. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have a plaque that said 3 other people also enslaved here. You could, but sometimes you know the names, sometimes you don't. At least I don't. I'm still looking. But, the documentation is very scattered and irregular and inconsistent. Some people registered the births of the enslaved people in their households and other people didn't. I just want to tell you one sort of humorous thing. You can find in the vital records that, for example, William Noyes had, and then it lists the name, William Noyes had Harry born such and such a date. Harry is the enslaved person who was born in his household. And I've seen on websites that people think that William Noyes therefore was the father of that person named Harry, which is of course not true. But it's kind of interesting that you have to interpret it. You have to interpret these references as well as just find them. Initially, it's finding them and then understanding them.
Are there any other questions? This is just speaking personally, this is a very exciting project.
Well,
Do you have any closing comments?
No, just that we'd like to move forward expeditiously on the first stage of the project. Let me just mention that if you look in those, I did give you a list of links to other witness stones projects in Connecticut. In West Hartford, it's interesting, they've installed witness stones for, I don't know the number, but it's a fairly large number of enslaved people in the cemetery, because their thinking is that these are people who never were acknowledged with gravestones. And so they've embedded these bronze engraved plaques in concrete in a certain area of the cemetery. That's something else that would be something we could consider here at a future stage. I think the important thing is to get the idea accepted and the first stage of the project moving forward. And we'd like to install these stones, as I said, at the end of May, hoping that perhaps COVID will allow us to have an in-person installation ceremony. But if not, then it would be done virtually. But it would give a chance to the 7th grade students to present some of the projects that they do. They're going to be doing things like timelines and maps and poems and whatever. We don't exactly know, but we do know what's been done in other schools. So it'll be interesting to see what the kids come up with.
Carolyn, it's interesting that you mentioned, I did see the link that you sent on the West Hartford, the way they treated it. And that was one of my initial concerns about this project, was that the stones might appear to almost be like gravestones, and you wouldn't want that. I mean, you wouldn't want passersby to think,
right,
to have that sense of the plaque. Because
I understand your question, Deanie, but because the plaque is this engraved small bronze, it's bronze in color. The only thing that might make it look like a gravestone is if there's a 2-inch, let's say, or 3-inch border of concrete around it. Would concrete indicate, seem to suggest a grave marker? Right. But the stones will say so-and-so enslaved here. It doesn't say buried here. And I think the size and the shape and the look of these plaques themselves suggest more a historic marker than
They're small enough. They're small enough.
They're small and they're shiny and they're brass and they don't really look like gravestones.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
I'm assuming that this would be, in other words, for people who come to OLI. I'm thinking about that you will work up a program both with the historic district and with the Florence Griswold, that their docents will know about this and encourage people as they're walking the village to look for these markers.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Carol, one other question. Have you thought of, these stones are so small, grass will grow over them.
Right.
You get dirt buildup and then it encroaches and
That's true, John. We've thought a lot about that, and I would be really appreciative of any suggestions. The idea that we had was to put a a frame around them. In other words, if you just embed the brass, the 4x4-inch brass plaque on the concrete block itself. Martha has photographs of these, what they actually look like, so you can see before what it looks like before it's installed. But it's really very small. And so our idea was to put something around it, as they have done in West Hartford and in Guilford. They've put bricks around them. Bricks are a little sloppy looking, but it's a natural material. It's something we could certainly consider. But the idea would be to keep grass from growing over and also to keep the bronze plaque from being damaged inadvertently. But they're going to become part of the landscape, as it were. So I don't know what the absolute best way to do it is. I mentioned that the church will take on maintenance of the plaques to keep them shiny, to keep the brass polished, and they'll do that as part of their youth service program. And there might be other Lyme Youth Service Bureau, someone else might want to join in on that, but they have assured us that they will do that twice a year, every year without fail. So the bronze plaques will not be allowed to just deteriorate. So best, any of you have, just send me an email if you have any thoughts about how best to protect them, how best to frame them. That I'd be really grateful for any suggestions.
I look forward to your call this afternoon.
Okay, good. And last thing just for the group is that I'm going to look to, I'm new enough to the commission that I don't really know the procedures that well, so I'm going to look to Martha to guide me. But I think for the February meeting, as I understand it, I would be submitting a CFA for all of these, for the stones plus the library sign. And I just need a little bit of guidance on what to do at the February meeting. I would hope that this project could be approved in some form so that the fabricator would like to have information by the end of March for a late May installation. So a 2-month lead time. So I'm a little bit concerned about the time frame. That I want to be sure we move this along quickly, and I can address anything that needs to be addressed. Perhaps
So you'll be getting permission from the property owners between now and that February meeting?
It would be, yes. And I maybe John can guide me on how best to go about that. You can just let me also know, what did you do with Marty Ames for, when you approached her? Did you go in person? Did you, who went and who presented it in what terms? And that might be helpful. If, for example, Marty Ames says no, then what? So the workaround would be to place the stone on the lawn of the church, and the stone itself would say "enslaved" across the road or "enslaved" opposite this site, just the way you did for the Lafayette sign, or it could go on the parsonage grounds and it could read "enslaved" adjacent to the site, something like that. So I think there are ways to get around it if we are told no by some property owners. On the other hand, my understanding from the meetings that I've attended is that Marty objected to it sticking up and making people think it was a museum. So perhaps she wouldn't object to this, one 4x4 plaque in the ground. I don't know. I'm just musing. That's all. This just thinking aloud.
We can also cover that this afternoon.
Great.
Okay.
So guys,
this is really thank you for all the work and leadership you're taking, Carolyn. Very helpful.
I'm glad you're enthusiastic and supportive, John. Thank you.
Is there any other new or old business that we need to deal with? If not hearing any, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
I'll second it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. And we've got some exciting things that we're working on.
Thank you.
Sounds
Bye,
great.
everybody.
Bye.
Martha, once again, thank you for all your preparation. Very helpful for our meetings.
Great. And I'll be in touch with everybody.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks. Thank you.
Adios. Bye.